Okay, Shabbat Shalom. Here we go. Here we go. Hi, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Papers are coming around. If you're at home, same place as always, tbam.org/worksheet. Here we go. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat La'asot et ha-Shabbat Le'dorotam berit olam V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat La'asot et ha-Shabbat Le'dorotam berit olam B'nei Reuven v'nei Yisrael Oti le'olam Oti le'olam V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat La'asot et ha-Shabbat Le'dorotam berit olam Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat La'asot et ha-Shabbat Le'dorotam berit olam Uvayom hashvi shavat vayinafash Shavat vayinafash Shavat vayinafash V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat La'asot et ha-Shabbat Le'dorotam berit olam Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Borei peri hagafen Amen l'chaim. Okay. And blessing for study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay, so we're starting a new book of Torah. We're up to Deuteronomy, in Hebrew, Devarim, and our third triennial cycle, which is almost over. As we get to Tisha B'Av later this week, and then move towards the end of summer and High Holy Days, we'll then move to the first triennial cycle. But so we're starting Deuteronomy. We're going to look at a few verses of chapter 3, but whenever you're looking at Deuteronomy, it's always worthwhile to look back to other places in the Torah, specifically, well, in many cases, the book of Numbers, because Deuteronomy is now, in Hebrew, Devarim, but Deuteronomy, if you speak French, de is two, right? So my daughter's actually coming home tonight from France. She was there for 2 weeks on a French immersion program. And she's taken 3 years of high school French. And with 3 years of high school French and 2 weeks of immersion, she can almost, order a meal and find the bathroom and, but that's because she's in AP French. And she gets A's. The kids who aren't AP and who get like B's, they can't find the bathroom. They can't find it. So, it's an amazing thing. So we're going to send her for 12 days for a French immersion program. And I've been learning Hebrew for 25 years. And, still working on it. But in 12 days, she probably, oh yeah, it's worth it for sure. whatever. Okay. The irony is, though, I'll tell you just very quickly, she was in a program in Nice, France, which normally I wouldn't care. But when my great-grandfather, who was ordained as a rabbi in the old city of Jerusalem in 1927, was sent by Rav Kook, the chief rabbi of Palestine at the time, on his first job, he was sent to Nice, France. And he stayed there for 6 months. But while he was there for 6 months, my grandfather was born. So my daughter is the first Barris to go back to Nice, France since 1927. My grandfather got a much better offer after 6 months in Nice, France, which was to become a rabbi in Ogden, Utah. And the Jewish community at the time of Ogden, I mean, was like, Brooklyn. It was, there were like 4 Jews there. But in 1927, if you could be in America and not France, that's better as a Jew. He stayed in Utah for a year and then went to the Bronx and had his career in the Bronx from, the 30s until the 1977 when he passed away. And it's his Torah that's in our ark here that we read from every Shabbat that then became my grandfather's Torah and now is my Torah and so forth. But so it's kind of weird that my daughter said, I want to go to France for 12 days. That sounds absurd. Why? Well, it's in Nice. No problem. No problem. Okay. So part deux, Deuteronomy, means the repetition. We're not learning a whole lot new. There are some new mitzvahs in Deuteronomy. Don't think that because it's Moses' sermons that are repeating everything that's already happened, that there aren't any new of the 613 mitzvahs that are mentioned from the first time in Deuteronomy. There are. But a lot of it is, here's what happened to us. And what's really interesting is, if you look at Deuteronomy and you say, here's what happened to us, and there's some details that are different than the original story in Numbers, then you can say, what we learned in Numbers, now we can add to our understanding of what we already learned. And then it's really fun. Now, what I want to do today is talk about 2 people. I once gave a sermon. How many of you have heard of Og? Og, right. Okay, so Og is one of the Amorite kings. There's 2 main Amorite kings, Sichon and Og. Sound familiar?
Didn't he play for the NBA?
Og?
Yeah, he did. He played for the Heat. Alan Og. And he was 7-footer.
Really? That's crazy. Oh, I don't know. Wow. Okay, so there's two main Amorite kings that the Israelites are going to encounter and have to deal with, and we see them a lot in the Torah, and the battles that the Israelites have with them become very significant. One of the reasons they become so significant is because of a king named Balak. Remember Balak? Yeah. Balak says, I saw what the Israelites did to Sichon and Og. And because of that, I'm going to hire Bilam. And because of the whole Bilam story, the Jews end up worshiping Baal Peor, which we talked about last week. And a lot of things happen because of these wars that happen with Sichon and Og. Now, Sichon and Og are 2 people that we've heard of a lot, but we don't really we might not necessarily know who they are or what their significance is. And it turns out that Og, the rabbis love Og. There's a lot of material in rabbinic literature about Og. And we're going to look at some of it today. But Og is one of these guys in the Torah who lives forever. He lived from the time of Noah to the time of Moses. If you believe in that kind of thing. I don't know. Is it the same guy? But it's a very interesting story. Now, there's a slight difference in how Moses approaches Sichon versus the way he approaches Og. And there's a slight difference in the battle between the war that the Israelites fight between Sichon and the war that they fight between Og. And what I want to do today is look at some of these very nuanced differences and ultimately come to learn a point that I think hopefully will blow you away as much as it did me. All right. Clear so far? Okay, so we want to... No. All right. Ask Daniel. He'll explain it to you. All right. We're going to begin Deuteronomy chapter 3, which is a rehashing of the battle with Sichon and Og, which means to say that the battle already happened. And where did that battle already happen? Numbers chapter 21. So we're going to go back, after we read chapter 3, the beginning of chapter 3 of Deuteronomy, we're going to want to jump back to Numbers 21. So let me just say this clearly one more time, just so we know what we're doing. We want to look at the rehashing of what happened in the battle with Sichon and Og, as Moses is explaining it to the Jewish people. Okay? Now, where are we? We're sort of on the border of the Jordan and the Dead Sea, on the Jordanian side, where Moses is giving his lectures before he dies and the Jews go in. And he's saying, remember when we fought Sichon and Og. Now, he wouldn't bring it up again if there wasn't a lesson, if it wasn't important, if they didn't need to know it. There are other battles that he's not going to bring up. But the fact that Moses is bringing up these battles of Sichon and Og in Deuteronomy means that there's a lesson to be learned there. So what I want to do is look now at the rehashing of it, and then go back and look at what actually happened. And try to figure out how we can compare. Okay? Okay, Norman, here we go. Chapter 3, verse 1. Do you have a mic? Yeah, okay, good.
We made our way up the road toward Bashan, and King Og of Bashan, with all his troops, took the field against us at Edrei. But the Eternal One said to me, do not fear him, for I am delivering him and all his troops and his country into your power, and you will do to him as you did to Sichon, king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon.
Okay, so what does God, looking very carefully and sticking very closely just to what the Torah tells us, what does God say to reassure Moses? Don't fear him. Now, does Moses seem like a guy? If God tells you go and conquer these people, does Moses seem like a guy who would be worried that the Jews could lose? No. Right. I mean, that's the spies. That's who the spies were. Moses is the opposite of them. But for whatever reason, God senses Moses might be scared. And the reason I say this is because when God tells Moses to go and conquer other people, he doesn't tell him, do not fear. He just says, go do it. And when he goes to conquer Sichon, he goes to conquer, Moses goes and does it. God doesn't say, do not fear. Only in the case of Og does God warn Moses, do not fear. So I just want to pay attention to that for now. Okay. Okay, let's keep going. Verse, where do we get to? 3? 3, okay.
So our God Adonai also delivered into our power King Og of Bashan with all his troops, and we dealt him such a blow that no survivor was left. At that time we captured all his towns. There was not a town that we did not take from them. 60 towns, the whole district of Argob, the kingdom of Og in Bashan. All those towns were fortified with high walls, gates, and bars, apart from a great number of unwalled towns. We doomed them as we had done in the case of King Sihon of Heshbon. We doomed every town, men, women, and children, and retained as booty all the cattle and the spoil of the towns. Thus we seized at that time from the 2 Amorite kings the country beyond the Jordan, from the Wadi Arnon to Mount Hermon. Sidonians called Hermon Sirion, and the Amorites call it Senir. All the towns of the tableland and the whole of Gilead, and Bashan as far as Salcah and Edrei, the towns of Og's kingdom in Bashan. Only King Og of Bashan was left of the remaining Rephaim. His bedstead, an iron bedstead, is now in Rabbah of the Amorites. It is 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide by the standard cubit.
Okay, so I'm sure this is what you were wondering.
How big is it?
So what?
Right, so, I mean, this is one of those sentences, or one of those verses you look at the Torah and you say, was this always there? Was that verse always there? So we defeated Og, we defeated Bashan, we took over all of their cities, we took over all their wealth, we've now inhabited all of the eastern side of the Jordan River. This is the land that Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh are going to take. When I was in the Golan Heights a couple weeks ago, I told you with a group of rabbis, one of the rabbis pulled out a Tanakh and said, this is the land that Manasseh took. And I said to him, you see where you're pointing? It was there. You're too... He didn't think it was funny. Yeah. But, so listen, when you're with 12 rabbis, my book had just come out. And I spent a week with 11 other rabbis making fun of me. Because it's what rabbis do. No, rabbis are not impressed with other rabbis. There's nothing you can do to impress another rabbi. So they're saying, your book, A Reason to Rise, so it's about challah. So I didn't want to say anything. Someone from AIPAC told them that it had just come out. I knew this was going to happen. There were a lot of Viagra jokes. It was really annoying. So it was...
You're jealous.
Yeah. So, what are you going to do? All right. The one thing you don't expect to hear is, we killed this big king, we killed this big king, we took his bed. Now, right, king size. Where do you think the term king size bed comes from? So, but if you, we're having a good time today. If you look at the verse 11, and Joe mentioned this earlier, when I first said who is Og, and he said he's one of the giants. Edith, would you mind reading verse 11 one more time? Let's look closely here how they refer to Og.
Only King Og of Bashan was left of the remaining Rephaim.
Right, what's a Rephaim? Have any of you been in Jerusalem to the German colony? Yeah. You know what the main drag of the German colony is called? The street? Emek Rephaim. Emek means valley. Rephaim means giants. There were giants who inhabited the earth before Noah. And they all died in the flood, with the exception of Og. And there's a story in the Midrash on how Og survived the flood. He hung on to the ark, and it's a weird story. But Og has been around for a long time, and he was one of the final giants to be killed. Now, remember what we said about Moses. Moses is not afraid of anybody except Og. Something different about Og. He was a giant. Now, when I say he was a giant, that shouldn't scare Moses. Because if you remember, when the spies came back from their spying out in Parshat Shalach Lecha, they came back and said, we're afraid of the people they live there. They're huge. They're giants. And Moses said, so? You're afraid of that? Now, this Og was even more giant than those guys. Right? It's kind of like you go to a high school basketball. I go to a lot of basketball games because my kids play basketball. I look at these high school kids. High school kids are enormous. I mean, enormous. Then you go to an NBA game. And it's like, are these human beings? I mean, you can't even believe how big. You ever go to a hockey game? See these guys? I mean, just enormous. So, they were big. The people that the spies were afraid of were like D3. But then you go watch University of Miami game, and they're like, whoa, that's Og. These guys are 7-2. The guards. You know. Okay, so that's what we have so far. Now, let's read there's a little bit more about Og. Let's keep going. Verse, where do we get to? 12?
And this is the land.
Where did we leave off?
And this is the land. 12.
12, okay, please, yeah.
And this is the land which we apportioned at that time. The part from Aroer along the Wadi Arnon, with part of the hill country of Gilead and its towns, I assigned to the Reubenites and the Gadites. The rest of Gilead and all of Bashan under Og's rule, the whole Argob district, all that part of Bashan which is called Rephaim country, I assigned to the half-tribe of Manasseh. Jair, son of Manasseh, received the whole Argob district, that is Bashan, as far as the boundary of the Geshurites and the Maachathites, oh boy, and named it after himself. You are joking. Havoth Jair, as is still the case. Okay. To Machir I assigned Gilead, and to the Reubenites and the Gadites I assigned the part from Gilead down to the Wadi Arnon, the middle of the wadi being the boundary, and up to the Wadi Jabbok, the boundary of the Ammonites.
Yeah, so we want to just kind of read to the end of you can maybe, Julian, if you want to take it. We just want to read to the end of the chapter, which is just through verse 22. And then we'll look at some other stuff. Thanks, Julian.
We also seized the Arabah from the foot of the slopes of Pisgah on the east to the edge of the Jordan, and from Chinnereth down to the sea of Arabah, the Dead Sea. And that time I charged you, saying, the Lord your God has given you this country to possess. You must go as shock troops, warriors all, at the head of your Israelite kinsmen. Only your wives, children, and livestock, I know that you have much livestock, shall be left in the towns I have assigned to you, until the Lord has granted your kinsmen a haven such as you have, and they too have taken possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving them beyond the Jordan. Then you may return each to the homesteads that I have assigned to him.
Okay, so we've heard this before, right? Reuben, God, and half the tribe of Manasseh, they want to stay on the other side of the Jordan River. God says, no problem. However, you have to come and help us conquer the land of Israel with the other tribes. And if you do that, and then you want to come back and settle this area, have at it. In the meantime, you can leave your wives, your kids, and your livestock here while you go and fight. And then later on, you'll come back. So that's what we just read so far. Verse 21, just to finish it off.
I also charged Joshua at that time, saying, you have seen with your own eyes all that the Lord your God has done to these two kings. So shall the Lord do to all the kingdoms into which you shall cross over. Do not fear them, for it is the Lord your God who will battle for you.
Okay, so now what I want to do, now that we saw the story of what happened to Sichon and Og as Moses rehashes it, go back into Numbers and look at the actual battle. So if you'll skip back with me to Numbers 21:21. Numbers 21:21. And it's just a few verses there that we need. These battles don't go on for very long. These are wars that only take 2 or 3 verses. 21:21 of Numbers. Joe, do you have it? Okay. So first we want to look at the battle with Sichon, and then we'll look at the battle with Og.
And from Bamoth to the valley that is in the country of Moab, at the peak of Pisgah, overlooking the wasteland. No?
No.
That's 20, isn't it?
21:21.
Okay. Israel now sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, saying, let me pass through your country. We will not turn off into fields or vineyards, and we will not drink water from wells. We will follow the king's highway until we have crossed your territory. But Sihon would not let Israel pass through his territory. Sihon gathered all his troops and went out against Israel in the wilderness. He came to Jahaz and engaged Israel in battle. But Israel put them to the sword and took possession of their land from Arnon to the Jabbok, as far as Oz of the Ammonites, for Oz marked the boundary of the Ammonites. Israel took all those towns, and Israel settled in all those towns of the Amorites and Heshbon and all its dependencies. Now, Heshbon was the city of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who had fought against the former king of Moab and taken all his land from as far as the Arnon. Therefore, the bards would recite, "Come to Heshbon, firmly built and well-founded in Sihon city."
Right. I mean, and that's it. That's the story of the battle. You have someone like Michael Oren who writes a 600-page book about the Six-Day War. You only need 3 verses. You could have done it, God did it in 3 verses. All right. So, okay, so they went to fight Sihon. Sihon says, we're not going to let you pass. The Jews say, we need to get through this Moabite territory because we're on our way to Israel. And okay, if you're not going to let us pass, then it's not going to work out well for you. We came, we fought, we won. Meanwhile, Balak is standing down the road, terrified. Look what these Jews can do. And that's what happens. Now, if you skip to verse 33, we get to the second battle. Now, I want to point out, before we look at this battle with Og is 3 verses. It's also on the sheet. I brought, if you look down 3 sources, it says Numbers 21, verses 33 and 35. This is on the source sheet. The whole battle with Og is 3 verses. But what I want to do, just for a moment, is dissect all 3 verses. So you can look in your book or on the sheet or on your phone or wherever you have Torah in front of you. Shelley, would you mind reading the chapter 21 of Numbers, verse 33?
They marched on and went up the road to Bashan, and King Og of Bashan, with all his people, came out to Edrei to engage them in battle. But the Lord...
Okay, so now, what do we know that's different about Og? The Jews just destroyed Bashan. Now, there's a very special relationship between Sihon and Og. I hate to give it away this early. I still have 27 minutes. But they're brothers. Sihon and Og are brothers, according to the rabbis. Now what? Not in the Torah. It's only according to the rabbi. So you can take it or leave it. You may not. I can live with it either way.
Was he a giant?
But not that we know of. I think he might have been born later. It was his younger brother who was born 300 years later. But let's just say this: the Jews destroy Sihon. We see 2 other kings. Og, who says, "Oh yeah, you know the line in Rocky? I think it's Rocky like 8 or something, where the bad guy like punches Paulie, and Rocky comes over and says, you know the famous, why don't you try knocking me down? You know that line? And then they fight in the bar. Well, that's Og. You took out my brother. Og says, yeah, okay. Why don't you try knocking me down? So that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is down the road. Balak, who's so scared that he's got to hire Bilam to curse the Jews because he knows he can't win. So what's the difference in the approach between Balak, who's got a bigger territory, than Og? Og is not scared to fight the Jews, and Balak is. Well, Og's a giant. Og is more confident in his ability, I guess. So that's what we know so far. Question? Do you have a mic? Can we pass the mic back? Here it comes. Anyone?
Who is whose brother?
Yeah.
You said who and who?
Sichon and Og. So Sichon is the king they just defeated.
And he was a giant too?
The Torah doesn't say that. I don't know that.
Because if he wasn't, they weren't brothers, one. And the other thing is, they don't rule over the same territory. So now, like if you think about England and brothers, if they're both going to be king, you don't say, well, I'm king of this and he's king of that. If you're in the same family, you rule the same land. So I know this, you didn't care which way or the other, and it doesn't even much have to do with the story. It's just that they weren't brothers.
Okay. So,
Your cousins.
hang on. If you look at the last source on the sheet, now, this isn't as authoritative as your analysis. It's only the Talmud. It's only the Talmud. But it's not the Torah. I admit it's not the Torah. But according to the Talmud, in Bavli Nida 61a, it says, now Sichon and Og were brothers. Okay. Don't read too far, because I want to, it's going to say, why was Moses afraid of Og and not Sichon? I don't want to go into that yet. But I'm just showing, I'm not making this up. It's a Talmudic idea. But before we do that, if you look at back on the source sheet, if you look at these 3 verses from Numbers, the first verse says, so earlier Numbers 21 we read, the Jews, Sichon went out to challenge the Jews destroyed them, no problem.
That's easy.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's funny, we have no holiday for that one. Good stuff. All right. Then they turned and headed north toward Bashan. Og, the king of Bashan, came out toward them with all his people to wage war at Edrei. Now remember what we saw in Deuteronomy? God said to Moses, don't fear. And look what it says here. This is the same thing. Verse 34, the Lord said to Moses, do not fear him, for I have delivered him, his people, and his land into your hand. You shall do to him as you did to Sichon, the king of Amorites, who dwells in Heshbon. How long did the war last? According in the Torah, 1 verse, 35. They smote him, his sons, and all his people until there was no survivor, and they took his land. That was it. 1 verse. The whole battle with Og. You know, we hear about Og all the time, and the battle with Og, and Og's always mentioned. The whole battle with Og is 3 verses. Actually, the battle is only 1 verse. The second verse that comes before the battle is do not fear. So now we ask the question one more time. Why was Moses afraid of Og, but not Sichon? And the answer is not because he was a giant. That wouldn't scare Moses. There's something else that would scare Moses. Moses is a very spiritual guy. He looks deeper than, just how big the king is. Who else did that? King David, right? He went against Goliath. He wasn't scared. I mean, he might have been a little scared, but he was the only one who was willing to go up and do it. Okay. Now, if you, I don't want to give this away. I have so much good stuff here. I don't want to. All right. There's something different about Og and his power. Before we read the rest of that Talmudic verse, I hope you didn't look ahead. You don't want to. This is so good, you don't want to spoil it. But there's something different about Og that Moses is afraid. But beyond that, he also is this giant that has extraordinary powers. Now, what we're about to read are some ridiculous stories. The rabbis themselves don't believe them. When you read these stories and the rabbis in the Talmud say that Og did this, they don't think he really did this. So for example, when it says he picked up and threw a mountain, they don't believe that he really did that. It's an allegory. And the rabbis come and tell you, we don't really believe this. And later rabbis come and explain. It's not what the rabbis mean. It's an allegory or a metaphor. But it's interesting. So if you look at the first source on the sheet from the Talmud, there's some information from the Talmud about Og. And here's what it says. With regard to the rock that Og, king of Bashan, sought to throw upon Israel. So when they went out to war, this is why Moses was afraid. Because Og was holding a mountain. He was a big guy. He was holding a mountain. Again, remember what I just told you about? We don't really believe he was holding a mountain. But he was holding a mountain. And he sought to throw it upon Israel. And there's no biblical reference, rather a tradition that was transmitted, meaning it was told to Moses on Mount Sinai, this story, or Moses witnessed it himself and passed it on, and it became a tradition. It's 3 parsangs. So you have to think, the Jews are 1.2 million people. A parsang, is several miles, whatever it is. It's a big area. And he says, I will go and uproot a mountain 3 parsangs long, and I'll hurl it upon them and kill them. This is like the first nuclear bomb, right? He's going to drop a bomb on all of the Jews and kill them. But then what happened was Og's scientists started to have car accidents and stuff. All right. He went, uprooted a mountain 3 parsangs long and brought it on his head. The Holy One, blessed be he, brought ants, and others translated as grasshoppers, upon it, and they bored a hole through the mountain, and it fell on his neck. Og wanted to remove it from his head, and he was going to because he was strong enough, but God made extended his teeth to one side of his head and to the other, and he was unable to remove it. Now, how tall was Moses? By the way, what happened to Og? How tall was Moses? He was 10 cubits tall. So Moses was like a giant too. Again, we don't believe this. It's just yeah. And so Moses took an axe 10 cubits long. He jumped up 10 cubits. He struck Og in the ankle and killed him. Okay. So the point of the story, one of the points of the story is in the battle, it was Moses who actually killed Og. And it's the only person Moses ever killed with his hands.
With his hand.
Be careful. Be careful. Be careful.
He used the name of God that killed the...
That's right. When he killed the Egyptian, he said God's name. Well, according to Rashi, if you believe in that kind of thing. Right. But the tradition is that he said the 72-letter name of God, and boom, that Egyptian died. Okay. Now, he might have killed lots of other people. He may have killed plenty of people in all the battles that they fought, but we don't know that from the Torah. And most of the time, Moses would stand with his hands up, and while the hands were up, the Jews were winning the battle. He wasn't really a soldier. It wasn't really his thing. Other people who were soldiers. King David. Did I tell you what they showed us when I was in Israel? I almost can't even tell you. It is so secret. I have pictures of it to prove it, though. How many of you have been to Jerusalem? How many have been to the city of David? Okay, you know the excavations so there's some new excavations there that are 10 years old, but they're not open to the public. And I didn't even know about them. And we got a behind-the-scenes tour with the army. And they took us down, and they showed us some verses. They had all the verses from the Tanakh. And they showed us where they found when David conquered Jerusalem and they brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, they showed us the spot that they found where the Ark of the Covenant was. And they found in the ground in front of it these V's in the ground. And that's where they would tie the animals. And then there were these stones that had holes in them. And in the holes went the ropes that held the animals. And everything that they found, we're reading in the Bible, the exact verses of what it looks like. And then they showed us, here's what it looks like. I have pictures of it. And they said based on the verses and based on what we found here, this is where the Ark of the Covenant used to stand. It's unreal. I mean, it's unreal. I have pictures of it if you want to see it. It's really cool. I have 4 slides. To look at each one is $12. But if you buy 8 books, it's $11. All right. Okay. So let's look. Okay. So what we've said so far is there's this weird story in the Talmud that tells us that Moses is the one who killed Og, and that it was done in this bizarre way in which Og was about to drop a huge mountain on the Jewish people, but then God performed a miracle. It bored out the middle. It fell and crushed him instead. This happens all the time. Like Hamas, they send up a rocket, and then it falls on them. Same idea. Okay. Like 80% of the missiles that fire from Gaza Strip fall in the Gaza Strip because they're not so good at it. It's a double war crime. They're shooting their own people. And all right. Okay, so now, does this sound familiar? The idea of a mountain falling on the Jewish people. Have you ever heard this before?
Yeah. Sinai.
Mount Sinai. What's the story?
Holding the mountain over the Jewish people, and he says,
Okay, now we're getting somewhere. When the Jews, this is very famous midrash, it's also in the Talmud. When the Jews are at Mount Sinai, they say, yeah, Na'aseh v'nishma, we'll do it, and then we'll listen to what's in it. And weren't they so spiritual and, impressed and whatever, deferential to God, dependent on God, that we'll accept anything you say. Meanwhile, there's a rock on top of them that God says, if you don't accept this, I'm going to drop this rock on all of you and kill you all. That's the midrash. So what we have here are 2 stories where people are threatening to drop a rock or a mountain on top of the Jews. One is God, and one is Og. And so what you'd want to do in such a situation is try to figure out what's the difference between the 2 scenarios. And the whole reason that the rabbis are building this story that nobody believes actually happens, but just building this story about Og having the capacity to drop a rock on top of the Jews is to compare it to the story of God had a mountain that he was going to drop on top of the Jews if they didn't accept the Torah. If we can figure that out and figure out why Moses was afraid of Og but not Sichon, then we can get somewhere. All right. As of right now, we just want to know where we're going. Does that make sense so far? Okay, so if you look at the second source on the sheet, also from the Talmud, this is the story that you know. The Torah says, and Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the bottom part of the mountain. Rav Avdimi bar Chama bar Chasa said, the Jewish people actually stood beneath the mountain, and the verse teaches that the Holy One, blessed be He, overturned the mountain above the Jews like a barrel and said to them, if you accept the Torah, excellent. If not, there will be your burial. And at that point, the Jews said, I could live with no cheeseburgers. Right? Up until then, they said, shrimp is a non-starter, lobster's a non-starter. Then they saw I could live with flounder. Whatever. Okay. I don't know if that's exactly how it happened, but okay. So that's what we have so far. Now, to answer the question, why could Moses possibly be afraid of Og? I'll tell you a quick story about Jacob. So there's this weird verse in Genesis about Jacob where God tells Moses, you're going to go back home and you're going to be blessed and everything's going to work out for you. And later, like a few verses later, Jacob says something like, if I will make it peacefully, then God will be my God and I'll worship him and whatever. And so we ask the question, God just told you you're going to be fine. Why do you think you're not going to be fine? Why would you say if? And the answer is, according to the rabbis, Jacob was worried that even though God gave him assurance that he would be fine, that maybe somewhere along the way he sinned. And he didn't deserve that blessing anymore and it was revoked. Now that didn't happen. He didn't. He was just worried about it. And he was worried that maybe I did. So the way it works is, why would Moses be afraid of Og? Only if Og had something in his stead that impressed God. Maybe Og did something that God was impressed with, and so Moses said, of course I'm not afraid of anyone battling. What I'm afraid is that maybe Og has also done some mitzvahs, and maybe God will protect him too.
God already showed that if Moses looks back to the flood story, because Og survived it.
That's right. Now, that's a very good point. And there's another story that tells the same idea. So if now what we want to do is look at the rest of that Talmud section, the bottom of the page, Nida 61a. Now Sichon and Og were brothers. Why was Moshe afraid of Og and not Sichon? He said they're the same family, what's the problem? Rabbi Yochanan says that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says, from God's response to the righteous one, i.e. Moses, we can infer that he feared in his heart. Okay, so in other words, we could say, because God said, do not fear, God knows what's in Moses' heart. He says, I see you're scared. Don't worry. So he said to himself, why would Moses be scared? Perhaps the merit of our forefather Abraham will stand for Og and save him. In other words, Og did a favor to Abraham at one point. What was it? As it stated, and the fugitive came and told Abraham the Hebrew that Lot was taken captive. So the Torah just tells us that there's a random guy, doesn't tell us his name, who came and told Abraham that Lot has been taken captive and you might want to get down to Sodom and try to save your nephew. Otherwise, Abraham wouldn't have known and Lot would have been sitting in jail and so forth. So he did Abraham a favor. Og. Now, the Torah doesn't say Og. The Torah just says a fugitive. But the rabbis love Og. So they say, that guy must be Og. Okay. Now, how do I know that? Because of what it says here. And Rabbi Fugitive says that Rabbi Yochanan says that the term fugitive is referring to Og, who was saved from the punishment of the generation of the flood. For this reason, Moses was afraid of Og. So just like you just said, there was a reason that he was saved from the flood, not because of what he did, but because of what he was going to do. And God saw this Og guy is going to do something good. I'm going to let him survive the flood so that he can do a favor for Abraham. And just for that, it's worth saving him. And he goes and he does this favor. Now, so that's why Moses might have been afraid, because Moses knew this tradition. Why do you know this tradition? Because God told him. Okay, so now we've pointed out one of the clues we were looking for. Why was Moses afraid of Og but not Sichon? Sichon had nothing in his mitzvah bank. Og had this, and it was a big deal, so Moses said, God likes Og. God saved Og from lots of stuff. At that point, okay, so that's what we have so far. But at that point, God says, you know that mitzvah he has? Don't worry about it. I'm going to let you destroy him. So then we say to ourselves, what about the mitzvah? What's wrong with Og? Why would you let him destroy Og? So, even though Og did something good, he must have done something bad too. So now we have to figure that out. Clear so far? Okay, so now, there's a midrash. Genesis Rabbah 42:14. And once we read this midrash, maybe we can learn a lesson. Okay, so here we go. This is going to shock you. Og did not have pure motivations for his actions when he helped Abraham. Really? Is that a thing? You would do something nice for someone else for your own benefit? Is that something that exists in the world? I'll be nice to this guy. He knows people. You know? Right? You've heard that before? You see someone wouldn't give the time of day to. You can't stand this guy. Oh, you're on the board where my daughter wants to go to college? Wow. Yeah. How you doing? Right? That's called ulterior motives. Yeah. Og did not have pure motivations for his actions. He said to himself, Abraham is vengeful. I will tell him that his nephew Lot was captured, and he will go out to battle and be killed. Then I will marry Sarah. So what he says is, I'm going to go tell Abraham he's one guy. He's going to go attack Sodom. Sodom's a whole country. Abraham's just one guy. Sodom's going to kill Abraham. Sarah's going to be single. It's the King David school of meeting women. Right? You've heard this, you know the story about Sheva? Okay. By the way, when we were in David's, when we're there and we're looking at David's, David's palace and where the Holy of Holies was, where they kept the Holy of Holies, and David, and here's his shower, and what's the first question? Where was Bathsheba standing? Because she was naked when he was gazing through the window watching her shower. All right, doesn't matter. Okay. And you will be punished for your evil intention. God said to him, I swear that you will be rewarded for your steps to warn Abraham with a long life. And he will. He lived for a long time. And you will be punished for your evil intentions to kill this righteous person, Abraham, by falling into the hands of Abraham's children. And that's exactly what happens to Og. So fine, you are going to have long life, but because you did it for the wrong reasons, it's Abraham's children who are going to be the ones who kill you. And that's exactly what happens when Moses kills Og. Okay, so now we ask the question. Now we see what's the problem with Og. Let's go back to our final question to wrap up. This guy Og brings this big mountain, and that's the way he's going to kill the Jews, according to the rabbis. It's meant to compare to the story of God doing it to drop the mountain. So one of the problems that we have with this midrash about God dropping the mountain on the Jews is you would say, of course, anyone would do that. Maybe the Jews didn't really even want the Torah. The only reason they took the Torah was because God was going to drop a mountain on them. That doesn't help God's story for the long term. That makes God look bad. And so we have to ask ourselves, is that really the story? Is that really what happened? Did God say, I'm going to drop this mountain on top of you? And the answer is no. That never, I don't think anyone thinks that ever happened. But the whole story of Og and his mountain is meant to teach us something about God and his mountain in order to teach us something about the nature of the relationship between God and the Jewish people. Clear so far? Okay, so Og was going to drop the mountain on the Jews to kill them, and God wouldn't let it happen. And the reason why Og fails there is because he's not in it for the right reasons. He has ulterior motives. And those ulterior motives fall on him and kill him. On the other hand, the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, the fact that the mountain doesn't fall on them the way it fell on Og is because at Mount Sinai, and by the way, the battle with Og took place near Mount Sinai. It was meant to be a comparison. When the mountain doesn't fall on the Jews, the story never happened, but the point of the story is to show that when the Jews are at Mount Sinai and they say they're going to accept the Torah, they realize that everything about them is dependent on God, and their relationship to God has no ulterior motives. It's the ultimate moment of the Jewish people showing that they are 100% completely dependent on God. Now, Og, here's what was different about Og and all the other kings of the ancient Near East and the ones who are mentioned in the Torah. It's according to the rabbis, but this is what they believed. Og understood that God was God, that there was one God. Og recognized that there was one God. But what he recognized was, you serve this God and then you get stuff. If you do what God wants, you get stuff. And that's why I'm into it. I'm not interested in the do charity. I'm not interested in the love your neighbor as yourself. I'm not interested in the freeing the captive. I'm not interested in the visiting the sick. I'm interested in, okay, I have to be on God's good side just so I can get the stuff that I want. That's Og. That's why the mountain fell on him. The Jews, recognizing, unlike Og, but recognizing that they were completely dependent on God for everything in that moment at Mount Sinai, that without the Torah, their lives were useless and it was like a mountain falling on top of them. That's what happened at Mount Sinai, that we came to that moment. And so the Jewish people said at Mount Sinai, when we accept the Torah, we do want the love your neighbor as yourself stuff. We do want the ethics. We do want the charity. We want all of that stuff because we recognize not that we're going to get something out of it. That's Og. Og says, what can I get out of this relationship? The Jews say, we recognize that that's your will. And that's why we accept the Torah. And it's like if we don't accept the Torah, we might as well be dead and the rock might just as well, the mountain may just fall on top of us. God never held the mountain. The mountain's a metaphor for where the Jewish mindset was, that it's as if there's nothing to live for if we don't have Torah. That's what happened at Mount Sinai. So this whole person named Og, who lived at the time of the flood, was kept around in the world for all of these centuries to come in the age of Mount Sinai and teach us what it means to bend to the will of God as a Jewish people. And actually, if you look, this is summed up in Pirkei Avot. So there are two last sources here. The second to last source, Pirkei Avot, chapter 2, section 4. Rabbi Yehuda used to say, make God's will your will, so that he will make your will his will. Set aside your will in the face of his will, so that he may set aside the will of others for the sake of your will. If you can be at one with what God wants and what you want, then that's the goal. The goal is to wake up today and say, my will is that I have a beautiful Shabbos, that I pray, that I have time with family, that I learn some Torah, that I do Shabbos the way God intended it. Og would never do that. Og would say, Shabbos, a day off, 36 holes, then a movie, then the mall, then, right, that's Og. That's not us. I mean, that is us, but that's what we're trying to get away from. It's not us. Now, what's the mechanism? What's the mechanism by which we show God that that's the will that we're aiming for? So if you look at what Rav Soloveitchik said in his book, Worships of the Heart, page 10. I put page 10 because some of you might have thought, sounds like page 9. No, all right, I don't know. All right. The reason for the centrality that Judaism has given the element of petition in the service lies in our philosophy of prayer. Avodah shebalev. So avodah means sacrifices. The sacrifice of animals that we used to make, we don't have that anymore. Today we have avodah shebalev, the sacrifices that come from our heart, which is a euphemism for prayer.
But didn't that come much later?
Yeah. So Rav Soloveitchik came even after that. So, but avodah shebalev. So before sacrifices of the heart, we have sacrifices of animals, but you had to have a certain mindset when you went to sacrifice the animals too. So he says, for all its tendency to express religious expression as a whole, and particularly its emotional aspect, does also tend to single out a particular state of mind. For when we view the noetic content of prayer, we must admit that that one emotion is central as far as prayer is concerned, namely the feeling of unqualified dependence. So whether you are in, there's three parts of prayer. There's praise, there's blessing, and there's petition. So whether you're asking God for stuff or you're offering God your praise and thanks, the feeling that you're supposed to have in prayer is that complete, this is what Rav Soloveitchik argues, complete and unqualified dependence on God. That's something Og would never do. But when the Jewish people accepted the Torah at Mount Sinai, we were willing to say, we will do and we will listen to everything you say, because our goal in life is to make our will what is your will. And it was only once Moses realized that that's not what Og stands for. Og did good things, but for the wrong reasons. Then Moses said, okay, I have nothing to fear out of this. And he went and he was able to slay Og. And we get all of this from 3 verses in Deuteronomy and another 3 verses on each side of Sichon and Og in the book of Numbers. And that's why Sichon and Og, who otherwise are these kings that you wouldn't even know or care about, play such an important role in the Torah. Okay. Shabbat Shalom.
What's the title? Hi, neighbor.
You're on the wrong side.
Kindness on my request.